Welcome to Frost Sessions, the Frost School of Music's official podcast. In this episode, the University of Miami Creative Centers really shine bright as Iron Composer winner Dr. Dorothy Hindman explores the process of composing an art collection with the Lowe Art Museum's very own Dr. Christina Larson. Together, Dr. Hindman and Dr. Larson discuss how art and music composition can create beauty, what object-based learning is all about, and how to embrace project uncertainty. Thank you so much for joining us, and remember to stay tuned to Frost Sessions.
Thank you for joining us today. I'm Dorothy Hindman, and I am a composer, and I teach in the Department of Music Theory and Composition at the Frost School at University of Miami. And it's my pleasure to be here today to talk about a year-long project that I have just completely wrapped up called Composing the Collection. And I want to introduce my partner in crime, Christina Larson, who is going to tell us a little bit about herself.
Yes, thanks, Dorothy. Yes, I was Professor Hindman's partner in crime this past year on composing the collection. I'm Christina Larson. I work in academic engagement for the University of Miami Libraries and also for the Lowe Art Museum. And in that capacity, I oversee a program called CREATE. And it's the full title of that program is the Andrew W. Mellon CREATE Grants Program. And CREATE is an acronym, it's even longer, for collection resources, education, academic, technology, and enrichment. So anyway, under that program, we've had 26 different projects that have been completed or in the process of being completed. And these projects are to fund faculty-driven projects for scholarship, for teaching, and for research. And so Professor Hindman's project, Composing the Collection, was one of the most creative projects that we've had in terms of interdisciplinary studies and just, a deep dive into the research of the Lowe's art collection, and then just the creativity that was really part of the whole project in terms of the compositions that students composed and performed, and then of course the concert, which we'll get to in a little bit. But that gives you sort of an introduction to the CREATE Grants Program. And Composing the Collection was awarded $10,000. And it basically, we might have been able to do this project without that money, but it allowed us to kind of have a deeper dive into possibilities in terms of what we could offer the public and what we could offer the students in terms of their learning. So I think that gives a nice introduction. Professor Hindman, what are your thoughts?
It totally does. And I was very fortunate to meet Christina. And I was on sabbatical last year, and I went to this introductory talk about CREATE, and I really didn't know anything about it. And then she and Jill Dupy, who is the curator of the Lowe Art Museum, gave this wonderful presentation. And actually, I'm glad you spelled out what the acronym is, because it's hard to remember, because each aspect of it is really deep in terms of the goals of it. But as soon as they started discussing this, I thought, I can do this with my students. Oh my gosh, I'm going to create this CREATE project, and I'm going to engage my students with these objects of the Lowe. It's kind of perfect for composers to find inspiration in things in their lives. And so Composing the Collection was designed to allow my composition studio to experience this entire cycle, beginning with the research and inspiration stage, to the creation of a piece, to the rehearsal and workshopping stages that you have to go through to bring a piece of music to life. And then through the whole marketing aspect and working with another institution in order to put on a show right? And then finally, the premiere of their new pieces, and there's a little bit of an extra aspect nowadays because you create your works for virtual premiere a lot of the time, which meant not simply the concert we had originally planned, but actually a filming session and then video editing, and then finally presenting all of that as a live stream. So from start to finish, it was basically an immersive experience for my students. And not only did it deepen their technique, it also helped them refine their personal aesthetic and develop all of these professional skills. And so, I'm very grateful to Christina and to the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation for providing this opportunity. And I know you've provided it to so many other people, but I'll get into who the students were and what the objects were. But Christina, what is object-based learning?
That's a good question. So object-based learning is basically at the center of a lot of disciplines. First and foremost, probably art history and museum studies, but then also religious studies calls it material culture, or history calls it material culture. But it's basically a focus on objects of the past that provide a window into understanding historical context. Sometimes I'll say that when you come physically to the museum and you're standing before a work of art, you're standing in the same place that the artist once stood. So object-based learning is about building this bridge between the past and the present. And it's about inspiration. It's about understanding materiality. In the case of your project, it was twofold. The students firstly looked at the musical instruments that are in the Lowe's collection and examined them and thought about, what sounds they might have produced and thought deeply about that. And then the second phase was, basically selecting works of art that are more maybe contemporary in nature, where they could take a deeper dive into who the artist was, sort of the biographical approach to object-based learning. But basically, object-based learning is putting the object at the center of the learning process. And again, thinking about it as in terms of a bridge between the past and sort of your present experience of that object. So right. I hope that answers your question.
Absolutely, it does. And before I go too much further, I just want to say who was involved in the project besides myself and Christina, of course. I had two students who just received their doctorates. That was Logan Larson and Gregory Watson. I have three more who are about to enter dissertation stage, and that's Rachel Weiss, Ryan Seisky, and Melissa Dalbora. And then I had one undergraduate senior who was amazing in this project, and his name is Wesley Thompson, and he's going off to Manhattan School of Music in the fall to get his master's degree. So super proud of my students. Just wanted to give a quick shout out to them. But going back to this idea of object-based learning, in our project, we had, well, basically what I did is set up a group of musical instruments. And then I had the students go through the Lowe and choose a companion object. So to get into it a little bit more, the objects that I chose, the Lowe has an amazing musical instruments collection. I'm not sure how many people know this, but the Lowe has textiles, it has manuscripts, it has all kinds of things other than the artworks that are on display. And so I chose 6 instruments. I chose the oldest instrument in the collection, which is an Olmec rattle. It's just a round rattle. I chose 3 different kinds of wind instruments. One was a whistle in the shape of a bufo toad. One was a double flute, a Peruvian double flute from the 20th century. And one was a double-headed Ecuadorian panther ocarina, which is, so it was made sometime before 500, sometime after 500 BCE all the way maybe up to 500 CE. So we have, we're not quite sure, but we had some extremely old objects, some extremely new objects. There was a clapper that nobody chose, unfortunately. And then the last instrument was this lute that's behind me, that is from Nigeria. And so the students each came into the Lowe, and we had the most amazing private showing of these instruments. Each one was laid on a table. And of course, they're very fragile. And the students went around and took all of these pictures and got dimensions. And we were able, with the grant, to purchase museum quality photographs of the instruments. And so that's now part of the Lowe's collection, which is really wonderful. And then after the students had a look at the instruments, they were able to tour through the Lowe and find these companion objects. And really that was just going to be what struck them as artists, you know, as they went through. It was kind of beautiful. Most of them chose objects from the Pali Pavilion.
Oh, Pali, yes.
Pali Pavilion, which is the glass collection. Is really spectacular, the different things. However, two of us, and I did participate in it myself, chose an object that actually Dr. Larson is an expert on. And so do you want to tell us a little bit about that particular art object?
Sure. So that art object is, the short title of it is Jason Returning. That's kind of how but it's basically about Jason and the Golden Fleece, that story from Greek mythology. It's by the American artist Washington Allston, and it is a mural-sized painting. It's on canvas and it's on the wall, but it's a mural-sized painting. And the most sort of telling sort of part of it is that it's an unfinished painting. So you can actually see Washington Allston's work. He worked on this painting in the late 1800s, late 1800s, I think. And he was in Rome at the time. So, we have this on display. It basically is in conversation in some case, or in some sense, with the ancient Greek and Roman objects that are in the cases across from it. So it's not from the same time period, but it's from a Greek story, and he painted it while he was in Rome. So anyway, Washington Allston, he never finished a painting, but that's kind of the beauty of it. So you can see his terracotta underpainting, which both Professor Hindman and Rachel really surfaced in their compositions and in the video that was produced with their compositions. And then you can see sort of the outlines that Washington Allston was like the next layer. So you can see all these different layers that he completed in the composition. And then parts of it are almost finished. He's added what's called modeling. It's shadows and highlights that help to promote or help to make the illusion of three-dimensional space or three-dimensional people. So it's the composition, you know, it has many people in it. Jason is the largest figure in the foreground, but he's only, you know, traced in. He hasn't been fully rendered yet. There's architecture in the background. There's like a, you know, sort of a temple-like structure in the background, and just people sort of watching the scene take place as Jason has just returned. So, so anyway, that's in short, basically what my essay was about. The essay appeared in what's called Lowe on the Go. It's our weekly installment of writing by, you know, people like myself, other faculty from the University of Miami, some scholars that are out in the field. And they're just mini essays about the Lowe's art collection. And we've been writing these because we're going to select a sample of them for the Lowe's let's see, I think 75th anniversary, because it was founded in 1950. And so in 2025, it'll be 75 years, if I did my math correctly. So that's, you know, just a bit more backstory, you know, why we've been doing these Lowe on the Go essays. And that one is such an enigma, because you walk into the gallery and this massive painting confronts you. You know, it surprises you really, because I don't know if you had that feeling, Professor Hindman, when you saw it for the first time, but what were your thoughts when you first saw Jason returning?
Well, as you say, it's massive. It's huge. It's like the side of a house, you know, and to see this painting where you have parts of it that look completely finished. So groups of people and buildings, and then you have these sort of places where you just have the red outline of a person. It's just really so striking and strange. And for me in particular, I'm super interested in things like, when you look at a sculpture, I look at the shadow of the sculpture, for example. You know, I look for ways to create music through repetition and such during a rest, so that the listener actually, you anticipate it so much, you actually kind of hear it in your head, even though it's a rest in the music. So for me, this painting was absolutely a gift. You know, it has missing parts that you absolutely fill in with your mind. There's a chalk face on some of them. You know, there are chalk musculature on some of them, but they're just these giant red backgrounds with nothing on them. But of course, you can see a human being. You know, you see a person, and yet you have to make the person in your mind. So I loved it just so much. It just appealed to me right away. And whether I was going to write a piece of music to it or not had nothing to do with it. It's just, it struck me. And I think that is what happened with all of the students as they were moving through the gallery. Something just captured them because it had so much to do with themselves. So for example, Melissa Dalbora is a twin. And she was struck by this glass sculpture, which has two oval pieces of glass, and they're different because one of them, the piece of glass, it's kind of like a beaded glass, and it has a band going around it that's made of copper. The other one is actually made sort of copper mesh and has a glass aspect to it as well. But she's a twin, and she saw this, and somehow, you know, it spoke to her. And then on top of it, it was called Quiet Moment. And Melissa's work is generally very intense and anxious and, you know, sometimes politically motivated. And she felt like she just needed to write something calming. And so here's this thing, and on top of being this sort of twinned sculpture and very serene, it's called Quiet Moment. It's by Carol Freeve. And it's just, so this relationship for each of us as our own sort of aesthetic artist to then go in and find these visuals and then have essentially a year to create these works and bring them to fruition was really amazing. And what you just went into about Jason returning, the students, after they chose their objects, they did that kind of research on their objects too. I think that Wesley Thompson even spoke with the artist of his object. And
yeah, and I know that Logan Larson attended one of our Lowe Connects programs where his brothers, or not his brothers, but the brothers, the Del Torre brothers.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes, they had a program and they spoke, so he was able to attend that and sort of get extra insight into that piece as well. So yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And how special is that for them? And, you know, Wesley is even talking about collaborating with this artist again. And, but that was just the beginning of it. Actually, before I get into too much more, I was wondering if you had any memories of that day when we sort of all descended onto the Lowe, if anybody stuck out to you or.
Yeah. So, you know, just thinking back, you know, last fall when you all came to view the musical instruments that were laid out on the tables in the Beaux-Arts Gallery, which is the same gallery where the Duo Sequenza ended up recording the program. So the students spent a lot of time in that room. They spent an entire, you know, like half a day, I think, or maybe an hour and a half or something like that with musical instruments. And then, you know, almost a full day in that space later this past spring. And just thinking back to you all coming, you know, from my perspective, I was apprehensive. You know, we were still in the midst of a pandemic. We all had masks.
Yes.
I think Professor Hindman, you had one student who could not be there physically, so you had a Zoom. You know,
I was Wesley. I had him on my iPad. I was filming everything for him.
So you had Wesley on Zoom as we were looking at the musical instruments that were in the Beaux-Arts Gallery, but then we also went into the African Arts Gallery because you had one musical instrument that was in there, and then another, the double flute that was in the Indigenous Arts Gallery. So I just remember being apprehensive, like, because I had not, you know, even though we were open to having students come through the Lowe, we had protocols. You know, there were certain galleries that could only have 4 people in them at a time in order to be, you know, socially distant and be safe, because, you know, this all happened. Was it September? Was it August?
I think it was maybe August. It was as quickly as we could.
Yeah, I think it was August. And so, you know, the vaccines were not on the horizon yet. You know, it was just a lot of unknowns. And so we were all masked and we maintained our distance. And, but I think, you know, could we have just shown them a PowerPoint with these musical instruments? We could have, but it would not have been as impactful, you know, as that experience of them seeing these things and making those connections with those objects, seeing the materiality of them, seeing them on display. And I do want to also thank, I know that you thanked the students, but the Lowe staff who helped throughout this project. So not just me, I'm kind of like the coordinator, you know, I make sure that everybody sort of has access to the resources that they need. But Martin Casuso, who's our facilities manager, he set up the tables and made sure everything was fine. And he kind of doubled as a art handler for those objects too, because we were without one at that point. Ohenia Inser, who's our assistant director of collections and exhibitions, she helped, you know, basically with the objects and the selection and the photography of them, or getting the professional photographer, you know, getting his work done. And then also Amanda Belly, who's our registrar, also helped in terms of the object selection and information and things like that. So a lot of behind the scenes. And then fast forward, we have Bridget O'Brien, who, you know, came in later for the promotion of the online viewing of the, you know, online program, and then also vetting the marketing materials and helping Wes and Greg get the program up and running. You know, it was the Lowe's first live streamed event, and we have Greg and Wes to thank for all their research into that. So I know that's kind of a fast forward, but I wanted to make sure that I acknowledged, you know, my Lowe colleagues that really helped with the project from beginning to finish. But yeah, to answer your question though, I was apprehensive about, okay, so we're going to have, you know, like five students come to the Lowe, and just want to make sure everybody's safe, but also make sure that we use our time wisely and as they find the objects that they really want to work with. So.
Yeah, it was scary times back then. It was scary for us too. I think I remember we went in groups of 2s through the galleries. But I do have to thank University of Miami, because they put in these really amazing protocols. And the Lowe had those protocols, as well as a few that were specific to the Lowe. And so we were all briefed on all of that in advance. And we actually had a similar, I think the protocols were still exactly the same for the Lowe, but we had a similar experience where just in order to have the musicians and the videographer on campus, we had to get permission all the way up from the Provost Review Committee. And that was just in mid-April. So the U has just done a really good job of keeping COVID totally under control on campus. I think the very, very few cases, and as far as I know, 0 cases from classroom contact.
That's right.
And so I think we were scared then. I was much less scared in April, much less scared.
I agree. But just to give our audience sort of some perspective, that Beaux-Arts Gallery, that's where the Lowe has our, lectures, artist talks. We even had a dancing glass project from CREATE that Professor Carol Kaminsky coordinated that had a lot of parallels to what you had. It was with that, she had students in the dance program compose choreography and perform dances in response to to glass objects in the collection.
Right.
So anyway, I'm just saying that we've used that space for a lot of things, and fire capacity is 126 people. So it houses a lot of people, but with the COVID protocols, our limit was 14. So that just tells you how strict we really were with, who can be in the room and how many could be in the room. And so this project worked out perfectly in terms of numbers, because the day that we recorded, there were 10 people that were in that space, and then add a couple Lowe staff just to check in periodically to see if you all needed anything. But that just, puts things in perspective. So 126 down to 14,
Absolutely. Yeah. And 2 things I'm thinking about. Number one, I was at that dance concert when they finally put it on, and those were Frost composition students who were playing the music, and they're the ones who wrote the music. They were Frost composition people.
Yes, thanks for adding that. Absolutely.
So Frost, we get out there, right? But then the second thing is the Lowe was actually being used as a classroom during the fall and the spring. And so it already had these tables set up distanced that we were then able, each of us went in and sat at one of the tables, and we knew exactly, whether we were perfectly distanced. So that was super helpful. And also, it's crazy to think, but the flutist wore a mask in order to play, which I checked out with our flute professor, Jennifer Grimm. How do we handle this? How do we make sure that we're within the Frost protocols? And she explained exactly how to do it. And so, we as I say, I think, those protections are for us. And so I'm very grateful to the U and to the Lowe for being very clear on what needs to happen. And so that was very helpful. So I'd like to now sort of go back to what the students did after they chose their objects. And so first of all, they researched them, they measured them, they, did all kinds of historical research. And the other thing that I had them do, which I felt was super important, is after they did the research, they needed to create a sonic model. And that was for them but it was also because we put together something called a sway page. And that's something we learned from the Lowe, because the Lowe is using these sway pages to augment the patron experience. So when you go into the museum to see something, you can also pull up these pages and you can read about them. And in our case, you can hear the sound of the instrument with the sonic models that we made. So we were excited to contribute this as well. And we even had the rattle being round, we even had a model of it, a physical model of it created and made. So Rachel Weisz actually used that in her concert performance, in her score. So we really dug into those objects as well as these companion objects. And again, you can see all of this on the Lowe's sway page. But so the students then worked with me. So what it means in my studio is that they have a weekly 1-hour lesson with me. And so I watched these pieces go from, conception to the end. So for example, Melissa's piece was very quiet and pensive. And I kind of watched her write this piece, challenge her own aesthetic, which is really different from this kind of calmness. And she was committed to keeping things very simple. So it was a really special experience to see her exploring the things that maybe, she wanted to do and was less comfortable with doing, and to get to, after a number of months, this final piece. And I had that experience with all 6 students. It was really, that to me as a composer is major. That's probably the most important thing I do with them, is to try to bring out their individual voice. But then we delivered the scores, I think around February 6th was our deadline. We delivered the scores to Duo Sequenza, which is a flute and guitar professional duo. And they specialize in new music, and they're really virtuosic. And boy, my students write really virtuosic music. So the grant, the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation CREATE grant, enabled me to hire them and bring them to campus just for this. And starting in February, the flutist is Deborah Silver, the guitarist is Paul Bowman. Deb and Paul were totally communicating with each student, saying, this works, we're having trouble with this, what do you mean about this? And the students got to know them so closely. Again, this is not something that normally we can offer. Normally, if we even have a visiting ensemble, they come in for 3 days and they leave. So this was such a great opportunity for my students to make a professional connection that they're always going to have now. And then, as you mentioned, so my original plan had been to have a concert, and it was scheduled for December 14th. So this was supposed to be a 1 semester thing, and then COVID. So I rescheduled it. I got permission to extend it for a year, and I'm so glad, because there turned out to be a lot of moving parts here. But then that concert scheduled for April 14th, we also couldn't do, COVID. So that's when we turned it into this video program. They came in, they still had a 3-day workshop with the students after 2 months of prep. And then we had this day of filming. So we were going to have a wonderful reception and a wonderful concert and all of these things, and instead got permission to switch out that part of the budget for a videographer to come in and spend the whole day. Whereas normally that videographer was just going to do the concert. So yeah, a lot of changes from COVID, which
yeah,
Chris,
I was just going to say that you just mentioned the videographer, Catalina, is that right? She became almost like another piece of the puzzle, you know, in terms of the concert and the output that, you know, because you have different layers. You have, you know, the inspiration from the Lowe's collection of musical instruments and other artworks. And then you have another wave of the compositions that the students, you know, composed. And then you have duo sequenza that are taking another step further in terms of performance. Right. And then you have, you know, the wave of Catalina. So do you want to talk a little bit about, you know, sort of her work and her contribution to this project?
So fortunately, Catalina von Rangel, who her company is Ars Optica, excuse me, she is also a composer and a videographer. So that's one of the reasons I engaged her to begin with, is that she fully understood everything that my students were going to be doing. And then being a video artist, she had just 1 month to get together, you know, 6 pieces. I did my own, took my own out of her hands because she had plenty to do here. But she created the most beautiful performance videos. And again, you can find these on, maybe I haven't said it, you can find these on the Lowe Art Museum's YouTube channel. The whole concert is there, and it's remarkably beautiful. And this is partly because of Catalina's aesthetic sense and artistic eye. She just went in and gave such a beautiful 1000% effort toward this last unexpected stage of bringing these works to life. Yeah, we had to put the virtual concert release on the very last day of the semester so that we could have as much time as possible for her to work on those. But it was wonderful. Each of the students also, they made an introduction video to their pieces. And so for the concert itself, we had some discussion in between. Greg Watson moderated it. As you say, Wesley and Greg worked out the whole live streaming thing. It was remarkable what they learned, and they shared it with all of us. And then, so we would play the introduction and the video, and then a couple of the students would have a brief conversation about something they had in common, and then we play another introduction and video. And so it was very smooth. I loved the way it turned out, and I would encourage anybody to just watch it. You know, it's on YouTube. You can start and stop it, but it was so, I can't tell you how proud I was of them that night and the whole next day. I was kind of floating on air. And again, it's been a long haul for you and I, you know.
It has, it's true. It's true. And, you know, something that you were saying earlier really resonated with me, in that you were able to see these students, you know, sort of in their, you know, the sonic samples that you mentioned. We basically got to see them grow their pieces from, you know, just an idea to something really profound. Yeah. And that's something that I love about my position as the Andrew W. Mellon Fellow for Academic Engagement. Mm-hmm. It's that I get to see these projects grow from an idea to, you know, to completion. And the process, you know, it's never a direct road. It's usually a, you know, it's usually a winding road. Sometimes we go through, you know, a road that's like a roller coaster, and we go upside down a bit, but we get there, you know, and you know, you just have to embrace the process of growing and of learning and, you know, sort of culminating those ideas. Right. And so that's what I love about my position, is that I get to see these things from start to finish. And I get to see them even before the CREATE committee sees them. I really get to see the early ideas of these projects, and the same is true with your project. So yeah, our CREATE committee, it's comprised of about 20 UM faculty and staff members from the Lowe, from UM libraries, but also from departments across the university. So each of these projects goes before this committee, who places their stamp of approval. on them, and it is a rigorous process. So I'm sorry I didn't mention that earlier, but I just wanted to say like that these projects have different steps along the way, and
yes,
some more than others. So yeah.
yes, they do. And honestly, you've shepherded me through all of that, and I appreciate it greatly, because this project did have some serious bumps, and again, a lot of it due to COVID. So there were some reapplications, some resubmitting of a new budget. As I mentioned, we had to shift away from the live event. But also for my students. So one of the really interesting coincidences here is that we have the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation CREATE Grant. And then Frost also has a set of pedagogical through lines. And what that means is there are certain things we want each class to embody in some way. And each class does not have to have every through line, but the acronym for our through lines is also CREATE. And so I was kind of in my proposal looking at what ways overlap here. So one of the things, for example, is technology. They both have, the T has technology in it. One of them is research and creativity, those kinds of things. But one of them is entrepreneurship. And this project, I shared with them all of the grant proposal materials so that they could see how to do that kind of thing. I shared with them everything that went wrong as well as everything that went right. I shared with them the new budget letter that I had to draft. And I shared with them the process of having to get the Provost Review Committee permission, and those many weeks that I sat and I said, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know. We had a plan B, a plan C, a plan D. And that all is stuff that a composer has to know out in the world. You know, they have to know how to write and apply for grants. They have to know how to engage with organizations in their community and build projects. And so I'm not sure if you knew that I had like gone into all of the bumps with them, you know, as well. But
we learn from the bumps. We learn from mistakes. We learn, you know, those are our most important lessons, really the most profound ones. And it's great that you were like thinking outside the classroom, like thinking of what these students who are composers, who will, you know, what their careers might be like, and what they might need to learn from this project to be successful later on in their careers. So I thought that was brilliant. And, you know, Melissa was the one who, you know, designed the flyers, you know, that we used in all the promotion. I think it went out to 8,000, you know, of our Lowe members. And,
oh, that's incredible.
You know, something like that. But anyway, you know, she created a look for, you know, that would attract potential audience members. And so that was important too. You know, that was important work, and, you know, something maybe outside her comfort zone, or, you know, something that she learned along the way. So very important too.
So what we actually did is we met weekly for a year and discussed, as we were in each stage of the process, they discovered collective wisdom. You know, they shared wisdom, and that marketing is a perfect example of that. We were able to use the photo imagery that the Mellon Foundation had paid for of our instruments, like this, that's one of them, and our art objects. So we had these wonderful high quality images we could use in the marketing. The next thing is I had all these committees. Okay, your technology, your marketing, your, you know, concert logistics, your, you know, but of course they overlapped like crazy because there's only 6 of them. And so when it came to the marketing, Rachel Weiss, in one of our meetings, she pulled up something called Canva, where you can make posters and you can make Facebook banners and all these things. And she gave us a little tutorial on it. She and Melissa were on marketing. And then Melissa took that and ran with it. And then Melissa had to go through Bridget and you and get approvals before anything ever went out into the real world. And I think just that experience itself speaks to the strength of the CREATE Grant Program. It speaks to your coordination because you were always going back and forth, you gave advice. It speaks to the group aspect of learning. Obviously, it speaks to the objects themselves because they were central, to the marketing images. And lastly, it speaks to this crowdsourced knowledge, this group learning that we were able to have because of the experience. And I feel like every step along the way, we had those kinds of overlaps and opportunities. Oh, and yeah, they have to be out in the community, right? They had to research Facebook. They had to research, how do I talk to these people? What do I do? I just said, contact Bridget O'Brien. You're in the deep end, go. And so yeah, this was such a successful project from start to finish. I think we've probably reached our time limit. Is there anything else you want to add, Christina?
Just what an amazing project this was. I said that towards the beginning, but I'll say it again. For the students to be inspired by the Lowe collection was something really special for the Lowe Art Museum, not just for the students, but for the Lowe Art Museum to see, what they produced in response to the collection. Like you said, sort of the real world, and I'm not saying that composing and classroom knowledge is not real world stuff, but, these things that maybe an outsider might not expect that they had gone through, the lessons that they learned along the way, that they can apply to their own professional career. The videography and the work of Catalina, that was a surprise. When you said that was it was a happy surprise. So when you said you had a videographer, I had no idea that, to the extent that Catalina would tweak and work with, the look and the animation and all those things. That was just the icing on the cake. So
I don't think she knew either.
Yeah.
Not until the end there. But I want to thank the Lowe. Obviously, I thank you and tremendously appreciative. Have we mentioned Gina and Ebony yet?
Oh, no, we haven't. We should thank them as well. So yeah, Gina Valreso, she, is a quiet leader. She's our events planner, and she just makes sure that everything is taken care of. Marie Milholm, who's our head of security, she too, we wanted to make sure that you all had water for the day, for the day that we, were recording, and that, but that we also followed the rules of the Lowe in terms of those kind of things, food, water, et cetera, in this space. But yeah, Gina has been a really great person throughout this project too, in terms of coordinating event space and making sure you have what you need. And then Ebony, I think, helped with the object materials and research. Is that right?
She helped with the photos, helped us determine what we needed and what the Lowe had. And yeah. She was just, the whole project has been amazing. I think it accomplished our goals and more. So again, I want to thank you. I want to thank all the students for what they did. And at this point, we'll sign off. Thank you, Dr. Christina Larson, for everything. I'm Dorothy Hindman. I teach composition at the Frost School of Music, and we would love to see you sometime on campus.
All right, thanks everybody for joining us on Frost Sessions today, and see you next time.
And go to the website. Go to the Lowe Art Museum YouTube channel and watch this amazing culmination of this project.